Hey everybody, it's Anthony and Bob Barker back again for another project. And for this one, we have an extra set of hands to help out. That's Oscar, one of my neighbors, and this is actually going to be a build for him. Now, he's very experienced when it comes to home improvement. However, he's never done furniture before, so he came to me to see if we can help out with this project. So we're going to be making a credenza. And this is a side panel that we're cutting here. And you notice I kind of not doing my dado groove all the way through. And that's because everything is going to be inset. And so I didn't want it to go through the front because then that would be exposed. So we had to just do an interrupted cut there and then just chisel out the little round part that the blade left. And of course I had him do the same on the other side piece. Now, when we first brought this project to me, I actually didn't even know what a credenza was. I'm kind of guilty of that for a lot. I just make things, I don't know what the heck they're called. So a good old Google search told me the difference between a credenza and a sideboard. Apparently they're the same exact thing. It just depends on where you use it, and this is going to be in his office. And through here you can see we're putting big beefy dado grooves in all of the pieces. Now normally on the back part I don't put such a large piece, but just by the way that the lumber worked out, we're going to end up making the majority of this out of 3/4 wood along with some solid walnut as well. But it just seemed a shame to buy another piece of plywood just for the back panel when we had more than enough of the 3/4. So after we broke down all of our pieces for the main cabinet, got everything to size and shape, then of course we put on some edge banding because this will be exposed. Now we kind of considered doing solid wood edge banding versus the iron-on, but for him he wanted a little bit of experience with the iron-on one, so that's what we went with. And I'm pretty sure he regretted it because I think the edge banding was his least favorite part of the entire project. So here I'm putting in some pocket holes to secure this to the back. Now, what I should have did is actually just extended that dado groove into the back panel as well because it's 3/4 and it's plenty big enough. But I forgot to, so a couple pocket holes will still hold that in place and it's going to be just as stable. And so now it comes to the glue up of the main cabinet, and this was much easier to do with an extra pair of hands. I'm used to doing these glue ups by myself, and it always feels much more rushed and hectic. But with this, it actually felt much smoother, and my clamps weren't quite big enough to go to the side, so we kind of hooked these together. And I'm doing just one side at a time because our plan here is we're gluing everything in place, but for the side panels, we're just going to add some screws underneath just for some extra strength and support, and so we don't have to have them in clamps nearly as long. Or at all, really. So of course, after we finish one side, we go to the other side, make sure it all lines up, and then we'll glue and screw that in place, and then we can do the center divider. We're having one divider here because we're gonna have a bank of drawers on the right, and the other part is gonna be just a cabinet with adjustable shelf. The last part of this main cabinet is going to be the supports on top, and we're actually going to use those intentionally to attach the top later. But with these supports, of course, we use our stop block because we want to make sure everything is the exact same size so it doesn't pull it out of square. And then I'm drilling some oversized holes in the back support. And the reason for that is because when we attach the top, which is going to be made out of solid wood, we have to allow for some wood movement. Now there's a ton of different ways to do it. But what I decided for this one is we're just having the oversized holes. That way when we put the screws in there, there is just going to be room for movement going backwards. For the front ones, we're going to just put some straight screws through the supports to straight into it to make sure that that part stays stable. And of course, as we're doing this, the supervisor was all over us, making sure that we're not messing this piece up. Now for these front supports, we had to be extra careful with measuring out the placement of it because those the sides of the cabinet come out a little bit extra because we're going to have inset cabinet doors and the drawer faces, so it won't be even with that center panel. So we just made sure our spacing was right before we did that part. And since Oscar was new to our workshop, the supervisor had to pay some extra special attention and give him a pep talk to make sure he was up to the task. And with newfound confidence from those inspired words, we both got back to work. And here we're just going to be putting some holes for the pins inside the main cabinet for that adjustable shelf. We wanted to make sure he had a little bit of wiggle room for the different things he's going to be put in there just in case. Next up was putting in the drawer sides, and we did go with the undermount slides for this one. And just to make sure that they were completely even. We cut out a couple spacers that we used for each side. And then we had the different spacers for the middle ones. And then for the bottom, we're just going to put those flat onto the cabinet bottom. That way we know all of these are the exact same height. And we use my square there just to make sure the back sit on those were all nice and even. So with the main cabinet done, now we're going to be making some drawers. And of course, we measured the size of those drawers off of the slides once they were actually installed onto the cabinet. And then for the drawer bottoms, we're actually going to end up using the same 5/8 Baltic birch plywood that we're using for the rest of it. Not for any particular reason other than just like with my walnut plywood, we just had plenty enough of this, so there's seemed pointless to buy more just for the small bottom pieces. And here you can see our first mistake. Those pocket holes were supposed to go on the outsides, and somehow all except for one piece ended up on the inside. And in the end, it's not a big deal, but the supervisor was less than pleased, so he's watching us from the background there to make sure we properly fix the mistake. So then after we put a couple notches in the back piece, we're ready to glue up these. And I've done this many different ways over the years, but the simplest thing is just kind of clamp it together with glue, of course, and then just pocket hole those from the front and from the back, and then it comes out nice and sturdy. And if you wanted to see the process a little bit more, I've got plenty of other videos where I go into it in much more detail. But after all three of the drawers are done, we can go ahead and put on the hardware. And I just use this jig, not because it's necessary, but it just makes it a lot faster to get all these little screw holes lined up perfectly, as well as the hole that you need to drill into the back piece to receive the undermount hardware. Then we can go ahead and test fit them, and turns out I must have had something in my eye when I was measuring these because they were all off a little bit. So I had to shave off the inside part of the sides of the drawers because they were a little bit too narrow. But once we shaved off enough of it, then it worked out just fine. Next part, we are moving on to making the top as well as the drawer faces. And for this, we're doing it all out of solid walnut. And I was pretty excited for this part because I was really pleased with the pieces of walnut that we were able to get for this project. I just think they're particularly beautiful pieces. So we milled them up to make sure everything would go smooth for the glue up. We make sure the edges are nice and straight, and of course all through the same thickness on the planer as well. And then once we got that done, grab the domino and put a few throughout just to help out with alignment once we're going to get these glued up together. And I did want to mention before we did this, we spent a long time just staring at the pieces of wood and flipping them over, switching which side is up and down and which one goes front back, just to make sure that we got the nicest kind of pattern of the wood grain as we can between the two once it's all done. And then we did the main panel for the top, and then after that we went over to do the panel glue up to do for the drawer faces. And now the idea here was we were just picking the most pleasing kind of grain continuation top to bottom, and then we're going to cut out the different sizes of the drawers. It just feels like the grain pattern looks a little bit nicer if it kind of continues on the drawer down below, even if you cut into like not the full pieces of the boards, as opposed to having separate ones for each. And that was the plan, at least, although we did have a bit of an issue later, but we will get to that. For now, it's just smooth sailing and getting the top piece ready. So we cut it down to the right width, and then we just set it on the piece itself. That way we can trace out the exact shape and size of it. And we ended up deciding to have just a tiny overhang on each end. It was more just kind of for the aesthetic look of it, going from the solid wood to the plywood. I didn't want it to have to be too completely even. So after we have that ready, it's on to the cabinet door faces, and now we ran into another issue. So for here, we're just using the jig to go ahead and drill out for the concealed hinges. So everything looks completely normal here, going out just fine until someone who will remain nameless, Oscar, may have not put the jig on properly. He, instead of putting the lip on the side, he had it go forward. So the whole drill out part for the hinges were completely out of place. So what we decided to do, because we are planning on painting the cabinet doors. So I drilled out with the hole saw It actually had it happen to be the perfect size out of another piece of the plywood. And then we kind of dropped it into the spot, saw how thick it needed to be, and I just used my chisel to split in between the layers of the plywood. And that ended up actually working out really well. I just did a ton of glue with a little bit of extra sawdust underneath it, and it actually went completely flush when we glued it into place. And I just used the painter's tape just to hold it in, and we left it there for overnight until we started messing with it again. But once it was dry, we were able to drill out the proper spots for the concealed hardware, and it came out a lot better than I thought it was going to. Now, it's not perfect, but it's going to be painted and it's on the inside, so you're never really even going to notice that. So now we're going to go ahead and get these installed. So just carefully measure out where we need these to sit and get all the hardware put on the inside, and then adjust them to make sure the gaps are all where we want them to be. So the next part is going to be figuring out what we want to do for the bottom feet. And overall for this project, we're going for just clean lines, a modern look. So for the bottom, what we ended up deciding to do is I'm just laminating some of this 5x8 Baltic birch together and just cut some long strips, and we're going to be using that for the feet. So after we glued those together, it slips a little bit, so I'm just getting a nice clean edge. That way we can run those through the table saw afterwards and make sure these are exactly the same size. And with these blocks, we're going to have one on each side and then put one in the middle that's going to be a little bit shorter than the others. And so with our kind of clean, streamlined look, we didn't want to have any hardware on here. So we're using this router bit to inset these finger pulls into the cabinet doors themselves. And it's very critical that we keep these at the exact same length, but they're mirror images of each other. So I had to put the stop on each side and just be really careful how I measured it before I run it through. And there is the final pulls there, and that's going to be, of course, painted black, so you won't see the exposed underneath of the veneer on the plywood. And then here you can kind of see I'm trying to show you that this piece of plywood is actually a little bit of bowed. So it kind of came in the middle. So I ended up deciding the best thing to do is just kind of push it out a little bit with the support piece right underneath. And then after that, we just use the holes that they have on the bottom of these for mounting, just to hold the support piece in place, and that fixed that problem with the bow. And for the inner part of the cabinet, since we have that shelf that's pretty much at that same height, it keeps it from pushing it in that way. So with that ready, it's time to cut the drawer faces. And as we were doing this, I thought it was going nice and smoothly. So we cut all three pieces to size. And then we put the drawers in, and then we use little spacers here to get the spacing right and just go ahead and screw those into place. However, when I went to go put on the middle one, I realized this is just way too tall. It's about an inch too tall, but that's definitely not going to work out right. And then what ended up happening is I got my measurement wrong. So this one was an inch too short, which means we need to come up with a fix. So what I ended up doing was just cutting an inch off the top of this piece. Now, I did use dominoes in there, and we were trying to account for the placement of the dominoes to go along with the finger pulls. So that made it a little hard to actually get a piece that went on the top and actually made it big enough without the exposed dominoes. So it was a little bit of a hassle, but after we just poured through all our scraps, we finally found a piece that worked out well, and then we got that screwed back into place, and I still feel like the grain pattern flows pretty nicely despite my mess up. So with that disaster fixed, now we had to put in the finger pulls on all the drawer faces, and what we ended up deciding for this one was just to go ahead and put it all the way across the top as opposed to just on part of it. Just figured that the drawers were going to open a little bit better that way. And since we're at the router table, figured it was a good time to shape the bottom feet. Now, right now they're just big blocks, and definitely didn't want that because it just wouldn't look particularly good. So what we ended up doing is just getting the biggest round over that we had on those bits and just made those to soften all the edges. And then with that done, we can go ahead and just assemble this piece. Now we're just going to be using pocket holes to keep the frame of this foot together, and then we'll screw that straight into the bottom of the cabinet. And that is plywood, so we don't have to worry about wood movement or anything. And to be completely honest, I wasn't really sure how these feet were going to look. It was a little bit of an afterthought in the design process for this piece. But after we actually got it together, I was feeling much more confident and happy with the design of it. And to be honest, it's probably not the biggest deal because it's going to be underneath the cabinet and you're barely going to see any of it at all. And all those pocket holes will be against the bottom of the plywood, so it'll look clean, the parts that is visible. So now we're on to doing some of the finishes, and for here we're painting the pieces that we wanted black, and we're using this black poly paint that I've used on other projects. And I really like this one because it kind of goes on nice and easy. You don't have to put a primer underneath it, and it has a good show of the wood grain through it. And for this, we're painting just the bottom and the 2 cabinet doors, and that's it. Everything else is going to be just the natural walnut showing through. And so for the top piece, we're going to use just Rubio Monocoat Pure. So we mixed it up, scrubbed it in, and for this, I always do 2 coats on the actual like solid walnut because it just tends to be thirsty, and once it dries, it looks a little dull and spotty. But if you do the second process, it really kicks it up a bit. And while we're waiting for that to sit for a day or two before we do that, we can put on the wipe-on polyurethane on all of the drawers. And I usually do at minimum 3 coats, if not more, with this one, with just a light sanding in between, and that typically comes out pretty nice. And here you can see we're prepping for the second coat of the Rubio, just using these maroon pads just to scuff up the top, and then you just rub it back in like you did the first time, and then it comes out really nice. And you can see here the finished top, and I really love the wood grain pattern on there. So now that we have the painted surface here, we could go ahead and get it attached to the bottom. And like I said, this is just plywood into plywood, so we decided not to do anything fancy. We're just going to screw it into place, and that thing was really solid. So next we carried it on over to Oscar's house and got it up into his office, and now we can do the final installation. So we got all the hardware in and placed the top piece on, and we're just clamping this in place. That way we can do our screws through the front end like we mentioned before, and these are just screwing it just as close to the front as we can comfortably get it. And these are just going to be solid screws because if there's going to be any wood movement, we want it to go backwards. So on those back holes is the ones where we have the oversized holes for the screws with some washers on there. That way it has room to move within the actual drill hole. And I forgot to mark all the hardware since we had them already adjusted previously, so we ended up just putting those onto the cabinet doors and readjusting them, and then it came out pretty nicely still. Then we had to do a couple little extra adjustments just to get all the drawer faces in place, but once that was done, we had the finished product. Now, I had a blast making this with my neighbor. It was actually really nice to have somebody working in the shop with me. And you'll probably be seeing more of Oscar in the future since he has a few other projects he has in mind. So don't forget to subscribe so you can keep an eye out for those in the future. We'll see you guys then.